This is the story of The Thorn, a theatrical production over 25 years in the making, a show that has toured across the country for over a decade, and its historic run was made possible by well over 10,000 actors, acrobats, and volunteers. I want to say that number one more time just to let it sink in. 10,000 people who believe in telling the story of Jesus. But it started with just some young youth pastors trying to find a way to help students understand the power of the gospel.
About 20 years ago, I was working as a brand new youth pastor, and I was sitting on the edge of the stage one Wednesday night, and this 16-year-old girl came and sat next to me. This is after service, and she holds out her arms, and I could see she's crying, and I could see where she'd been cutting up and down her arms. And I looked at her and I said, "You don't have to do that because Jesus did that for you." And so I thought, next Wednesday night, I want to do an illustrated sermon, and I want to show two things. I want to show, first of all, the sacrifice that Jesus paid for us. And the second thing I wanted to show was the spiritual battle for the hearts, minds, calling, and destiny of young people.
I really think teenagers and college students have a very in-touch feel with the supernatural, like adults sometimes grow away from. It offers to teenagers and college students an acknowledgement of there's more to it than just what you're dealing with. And so kids that are dealing with like suicidal tendencies or depression or drug abuse, like there's a darkness that's sort of tangible or present there, and we wanted to show that in a way.
On Halloween night, the first show of The Thorn premiered in Colorado Springs. The show took place in the youth room with a couple of hundred teenagers and a brick wall as its backdrop.
The youth pastor that was before me had done an illustrated sermon called The Whip, Hammer, and Cross. And so I thought, well, what's left? The Crown of Thorns. So I called it The Thorn and went up on the stage and introduced this illustrated sermon. And the very first Thorn performance was horrible. The music was bad, the makeup was bad, the costumes were bad, and for you that were in that performance, you were amazing, but it was not great. They wouldn't let us move the grand piano, so that night Jesus rose from under the grand piano. So in so many ways, the first Thorn show ever was horrible, but I think the Holy Spirit had a thumbprint on it.
Over the next few years, the show grew quickly. It moved out of a youth auditorium and into a 3,000-seat sanctuary. The crowds grew just as quickly.
I think people had never seen the kind of things we were putting on stage before. I think there was just a groundswell of interest and expectation of what these crazy youth ministry people were doing to communicate the gospel.
What I found with The Thorn is if one person on stage was doing something, it was not very entertaining. You have one volunteer and it looks like you have an usher in a bathrobe, but you get 500 people on stage doing something and it's epic. And all of a sudden you have these sweeping scenes.
And this was a story that was resonating with people, and I don't know that any of us knew exactly why, except they were coming by hordes and droves, and you couldn't keep people away, and they would park lawn chairs in the lobby waiting for the show to open.
After over a decade of performing the show every Easter, The Thorn went on a nationwide tour. The tour felt nearly impossible at first, but it's continued to work through the years because a team of Thorn artists who are passionate about making the show engaging and emotive.
I think that adding the dancers and the aerial choreography, it just changes the show. It tells the story a little more from the beginning of creation all the way through the resurrection.
I portray the role of Satan, and so I'm playing the enemy of God, which can be tough from time to time as a believer. But the importance of having light and dark, good and evil is so important. It's a story as old as time, and this is that story.
So God is the center with the Thorn. So we all have him as our number one focus, and we're all using our craft to perform for his glories. It's unlike any other contract that I've ever done.
Portraying Jesus in The Thorn is Act 1 is a joy. The hardest part is standing in the makeup room for 2.5 hours, getting slathered on with your arms like this, which is excruciating, and then ripping it off. Blow dry the hair, makeup, costume, clean clothes, make sure the blood's all gone to be prepared for the resurrection.
I think more than anything, people walk into the Thorn, and when they walk into it for the first time, they're surprised. Over and over and over again, we've heard people talk about how visceral and how surprising and how emotional this representation of it is.
Whenever I get stressed out, whenever there's a tense situation in my life, I'm going for the joke. I have my whole life. And it just, for whatever reason, works in the Thorn.
And so I take no responsibility for what he says on this platform. I call this number lifting the stick. Come on, Johnny! You gotta want it! The disciple whom Jesus loved. Karen? What? You thought you were the only one who had Karens?
So, it was working. This youth group's passion play had now become a theatrical phenomenon. The story had grown and evolved, but the heart behind it stayed the same. In 2020, the show was ready to take another step.
So the 2020 Thorn season, I remember bringing these performers in from all over the place. We had them literally from all over the world that came to Colorado Springs to rehearse for 2 weeks. And I watched these performers rehearse, and I thought to myself, this is going to be the greatest Thorn season we've ever had.
The tour launched in March of 2020. Now, you need to understand, when you're traveling with a show, the outside world shuts down. It's early morning calls and late night rehearsals. But this was different. This was a problem too big for anyone to ignore.
In the spring of 2020, COVID snuck up on us, sort of like it snuck up on everybody.
People were starting to get nervous and emailing in like, we're not sure if we should come.
On Friday morning, the stats came in, the announcement came in from the governor of Colorado. We knew what the numbers were, and it was suddenly unsafe to continue.
I don't know that I was yet thinking about what does this mean for Thorn at all. I think I just was concerned about our team getting home safely.
We were afraid that, there wouldn't be resources to tell the story anymore. We were afraid that the community wouldn't want to show up. We were afraid that people would be too afraid to ever get out in public again. We really thought that the Thorn was dying. And so that was, all the emotions of fear and incredible sadness and loss.
The Thorn went dark for nearly 2 years. And then a moment of inspiration. What if we could film the show? What if we could create an immersive movie theater experience for audiences?
It's interesting because Fathom was excited about the idea of the Thorn on film. And we were like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's do Thorn on film. Remember, I actually did call up our two directors, and they were both like, that's cool. What does that mean? Like, what do we do? And we began to talk about what could that mean?
I didn't know what to think. Because as anyone who's ever tried to capture a live stage performance knows, what happens in a room in front of a live audience is incredibly hard to bottle and then put on screen.
There's just so much coverage because it's such a big show. So we had 8 different cameras. We had 3 different shows. We're trying to cram a lot of coverage. We're trying to film what would normally take 8 weeks into 8 days.
Tonight for the Thorn, it's the completion of one dream, with people in movie theaters across the country experiencing the film. But it also launches the beginning of a movement. The show is in performing arts centers around the nation this Easter season. Maybe it's near you, or maybe it will be soon. Our hope and prayer is that no matter how people watch the story, they encounter the power of God and experience the transformation of the cross.
And the Thorn family really is, for lack of a better word, that. We are a family. Instantly, we all came in with the same sort of expectations or hopes or desires or passions, and I've made friends for life, no question.
So another thing that makes the Thorn different is everyone has patience and love, and it's been a beautiful process the past couple of weeks creating the show together.
There's nothing more precious than telling the story of God, because he loved us so much. He gave literally everything.
So I guess what it means to me to have it play in a bunch of different screens all across the country all at once is this idea of like so many people experiencing a piece of God or the opportunity to experience him. Like, God is going to meet you. He is chasing after you because you matter.
People are brought face to face with who Jesus is and with what he did. The fact that there's things in the air and there's lights and all that, that's all just window dressing for the core story, which is that Jesus came to earth, loves us, lived like we did, laughed like we did, and was abandoned and hurt and bled and died and then rose from the dead for us. Like, that's the powerful story, the centerpiece of what the Thorn is. And that's what keeps it going, and what keeps us going is the story of Jesus.